Welcome back to the Christian Henderson Show. Guys, today I have a guest on the podcast who I've already learned a lot from and have been inspired by through hearing his story and some practical advice. He's a veteran pastor, trainer, and author whose leadership has had a large influence in small group ministry, discipleship, and church growth. He spent 13 years serving with Lakepointe Church Resources as a small group and discipleship strategist, worked 3 years with Nav Press, and for 5 years consulted churches with the Kentucky Baptist Convention. Earlier in his journey, he planted the Bridge Church in Spring Hill, Tennessee, served as campus minister, teaching pastor, groups pastor, and as an elder there. He served as the central groups pastor at Lakepointe Church, a church pastored by his son, Josh Howerton. He's authored numerous books and training resources, including A Different Kind of Tribe and The Perpetually Growing Church, helping equip leaders and pastors to build healthy, multiplying small groups. If you are involved or hope to be involved in church ministry or leadership, this episode is for you. So please, without further ado, help me welcome Rick Howerton. Pastor Rick, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Well, thank you, Christian. What a kind way to introduce me. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. So happy you're here. I'm excited to dive in. I know this is going to be a helpful conversation, not only for me, but for those listening. I want to start off by asking a question that I've never actually asked on the podcast before, but for some reason it came to mind when I was thinking through questions to ask you. Because, I mean, as an entrepreneur, pastor, leader, really in many high-level jobs, just as a person, there's non-negotiables that you have to have in life as you live, as you do things you do. Things that you would say, these are some things that I'm going to do or not going to do no matter what happens. So I was curious, wanted to ask you, Pastor Rick, what are a few of your non-negotiables in life and why?
Yeah, I would think I'd start with live a life of integrity. When you talk leadership, the one thing that is always true, those leaders who live lives of integrity always have a following. And living a life of integrity means more than just I don't sin, although you want to strive to live the purest life you possibly can, because that's noticed too. So you'll meet leaders who will sometimes in conversation speak in terms that aren't really pure and that would cause cringe for some people they're leading. That's never positive, but I'm talking about a life of consistency. So what you see, if you were to see me privately, I hope you'd see the same person publicly. So I would suggest, first of all, living a life of integrity. Another non-negotiable, I think it is vital for every leader, is to run around with other leaders, to be connected to other leaders, picking their brains, asking them how they're doing what they're doing, getting pragmatic information. I meet too many leaders who are looking from a 30,000-foot view all the time. Then when it comes down to actually accomplishing something, they don't know the procedures or the steps or the processes necessary to accomplish the work that they need to be doing. So it's really important, in my opinion, that you have a person who is more seasoned than yourself, who has not only known about how to do the job, but how to do the job. So for instance, I'm always hoping that when people call me for coaching or they call me to give them direction in their ministries, I'm never looking to just give them a vision for their ministry. I want to give them step-by-step processes and procedures, or I want to guide them on a pathway to where they can unearth those processes and procedures themselves. So it's really important that I'm with people who are further in the game than I am, so I know how to play the game based on their past experiences. My son, who's a pastor, you mentioned Pastor Josh, he'll often say that someone else's ceiling is your floor. So his point there is you can take what someone has already gained and learn from them, and you'll be standing on the ceiling that they've created and taking their ministry a step further. And if we do that generation upon generation of leaders, whether it be in church ministry or it even be in secular employment, we can accomplish so much more and do so much more than if we just had to start each time over again. So having other people in your lives. I would also suggest that it's vital. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, a non-negotiable is walking with Christ. Now,
Mm.
I realize there may be some people listening to this podcast who are saying to themselves, I'm not that guy. I don't walk with the Lord. I'm not a Christian. What I would just say to them is this: I have been able to accomplish what I have accomplished, and I'm not the guy that's made $1 million. I'm not the guy that is well known all over the country for his leadership. I'm not that guy. But what I have been able to accomplish could never have been accomplished without waking up almost every morning and spending time in the Word of God and learning the principles that Jesus, the greatest leader of all time, lived, and what he produced through his ministry came about because of his, how do I say it best? Because of his knowledge. He is all knowing because he is God.
Mm.
And when I read how he led people and how he journeyed with people and how he loved people and cared for people and forgave people, it is the perfect model for how to be an effective leader. Whether or not you're a Christian or not, it is the perfect model for how to be a great leader. So those are just a few of the non-negotiables that I think need to be considered, and in my opinion, need to be considered with a high level of intensity.
Yeah, that's really good. Integrity is a one that I'm constantly thinking of, like the same person behind closed doors as I am outside with the people I'm around. And I love that distinction you made about how somebody's ceiling is your floor, or that is a possibility. And I think it's so cool how the way you live life ends up culminating to who someone else or someone else could start. It reminds me of just my joy I get in hearing people's stories and seeing where their ceiling is. And it's like, oh, that is awesome. And then envisioning with them how far they can go, or their kids can go, or those around them can go. So, talking about stories, I'd love to hear yours, or at least a few monumental moments that have built who you are. So, if you wouldn't mind unpacking a few of those, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, let me do that, Christian. First, let me just say, as a friend of mine used to say, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I was not a good guy when it came to education. I flunked out of my first university, mostly because I was just there to play. I hadn't gone there to study.
Hmm.
I then accepted Christ, became a follower of Jesus, changed everything in me, and then felt called to ministry. So I transferred to another school. It was there that I was either on probation or trying to get off probation every semester. And that's not an exaggeration. I met my wife there, and through a series of miracles, literal miracles, we were married. And when we drove back on campus, we eloped. As we drove back on campus in a borrowed car, she looked at me and she said, where are we going to be living? And I said, you think I have a place for us to live? And then she said, I've never asked you this question. How much money do you have in the bank? And I said, you think I've got a bank account? We literally started life with about $40 in our pocket, no place to live,
Wow.
no car, with nothing.
Hmm.
But the monumental moments came when we realized that there were people who cared. So we get back on this little college campus, 450 students, little Baptist school in Kentucky. It's now a university. It's much larger, Campbellsville University. And we actually, a student who was single, who had a house, said we could stay at their place for a while. We did that. One day, walking back on campus, somebody said, why don't you walk over to me to what we called an efficiency apartment? They were very impressive. They were so small, you could actually sit on the toilet and look in the living room at the same time. I mean, it was the tiniest thing you could ever imagine. And they were furnished, and you could get them for $75 a month.
Wow.
And we walk into this place, and there's a sitting on the kitchen table. This little table was a 5-layer Rice Krispie treat wedding cake.
Hmm.
And he starts walking me around this place and opening the cupboards, and there's dishes and there's pots and pans and all this kind of thing. And I said, dude, I don't know whose house we're in, but we better take off. And he said, no, actually, the campus has come together. This is taken care of for you. The down payment's down. The first month's rent's been paid. The campus came together. And in that
Wow.
moment, we realized how important community was. I look over my shoulder and I'm going to share a few moments in life that changed my life. I was a very insecure kid. We moved a lot when I was growing up. And so I was extremely insecure. The goal was to make friends, not to accomplish much. I didn't believe in myself. I didn't think there was anything that I was really good at. And a few moments in time that changed the game. One was we got to this really nice school. We normally were in very urban settings and inner city schools, but we went to Louisville, Kentucky, and I ended up at Doss High School. The school had just opened a few years prior, so it was brand new. And we were very intimidated because all the rest of the kids dressed real nicely, and they had cars and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I saw that they had a choir. My dad was a gospel quartet singer. He wanted us to be gospel quartets. So we grew up singing, and there were auditions for the choir. And I remember going into the choir room and thinking, I will never be chosen. There's no way anybody like me could ever get picked, as you think as a high school student. And the choir director sat down and had me sing a few scales. She'd play them and I would sing them. And then she had me, as she played the Star Spangled Banner, I sang the Star Spangled Banner, and she said, "Thank you very much." And as I walked away, I thought, what a waste of time. It's just another lose for me. And I looked over my shoulder and I said, "Do you think there's any chance that I could even make this choir?" And I'll never forget what she said. She said, "Rick Howerton, you'll be singing solos in my choir." Now, this sounds like a nothing story. But what I learned over a lifetime is there are moments in time when someone is encouraging to you, and it not only meets your head, it brings your heart to life, and you begin to believe in yourself. That was one of those moments. Another moment was when my wife, who is the woman who I'm married to, said yes to me. She was far beyond me. Men often say we all marry above ourselves. Well, I most certainly did. Any guy on campus would have loved to have married Julie Clay. And she said yes to me through it. It was through the Lord opening the door and doing a lot of things, but nonetheless, we were married. Now, what I'm suggesting is this. I could probably give you moments of when I graduated from college because it was so hard for me, and when I finished seminary, or when I got a position that a lot of people were longing for at a publishing company. I could tell you a lot of those things, Christian, but the truth is, it was moments in time when normal people said to me, "You can do it," or did something that made me believe God could accomplish something through a guy like you. And I would say to anyone listening here, we need to look for opportunities to be encouragement to people. I'd share this real quickly. Ken Blanchard was one of the great leadership gurus of my young era. I mean, he's very well known for a lot of his writing on leadership. I once attended a conference that he was leading, and it was made up of a bunch of very impressive leaders of organizations. I just happened to have an opportunity to attend. There was one guy throughout the meeting who, on a consistent basis, you could tell he was kind of antagonistic. He was that guy, president of a company, probably wanted people to know he was there, and he was impressive. And he would ask questions, and Dr. Blanchard, you could tell, was very gracious with him. But at the end of the deal, one of the sessions was leaning into the topic of being an encouraging leader. And at the end of Dr. Blanchard's talk, this guy wanted a question, and his question, he said it with an intensity in his voice. "Dr. Blanchard, tell me when somebody's done something impressive enough that they deserve to get a word of encouragement." And there was a long, dramatic pause, and Dr. Blanchard just said, "Hey, man, catch people doing something right and then tell them." And I got to tell you, Christian, I've tried to live that way ever since that moment. And what it's done for me is it enlivens my heart. But multiple people have come to me and basically said that I did for them what a choir director when I was in high school did for me. And it changed the trajectory of their lives. I mean, and I would just suggest that is a moment in time that transformed my being toward I'm a loser to I could be a winner. And I think those things are vital. If I were training a group of people, which I do train pastors quite often, I would say that the moments that don't seem like a big deal may be the biggest deal in somebody's entire life to that point, because they respect you for being their leader, and you have said to them they have abilities, perhaps, or they have a personality, or they have potential that no one else has noticed in them.
Hmm. Hmm. That's really good. I relate to the benefit when someone sees you and calls something great out when you're doing the right thing. And that's something I can do a lot better at. I think so often it's easy to notice the things that the people around you are doing wrong and want to call that out, but it takes some effort to be there at the right time, at the right place, and see something that they did correctly, did well, did something that benefited those around them, and called out and encouraged them through that. But thank you for diving into some of those monumental moments. I love how you mentioned that what seemed to be ordinary people encouraging you in the right direction makes a huge difference. I want to dive into some church leadership topics with you today, because I know that's a big part of what you do and what you're passionate about. And in our previous conversation, I got to hear a little bit about your heart behind it. And I wanted to ask you, for me, for those listening, but specifically for those who are going into church leadership, what is your definition of leadership? And then also, how do we implement leadership correctly in the church?
Yeah, so my definition of leadership is this: the ability to obtain and retain followers, organize them, unify them, and direct them to accomplish a God-given vision. So let me say it again, because there's quite a bit of stuff there.
Yeah.
The ability to obtain and retain followers, organize them, unify them, and direct them to accomplish a God-given vision. Now, what we're talking about here, Christian, could take hours. So I'm just gonna give you kind of a process that I think is important. First of all, no matter what your role is, unless you're in a support role, but if you're in a pastoral role or a ministry role, whether it be group pastor, student pastor, kids pastor, lead pastor, it all starts with vision. And that is, in my mind, that is a mental image of the final outcome. So if I'm going to try to accomplish something, I have to know what I'm trying to accomplish. So if I don't have a vision of what I'm trying to get to, I certainly have no way to get there, because I don't even know where I'm trying to go to. So first of all, what is your vision for the ministry? Once you have your vision in mind, then you can say, okay, now what strategies need to be in place so that that vision becomes a reality? So strategically, I have to discern how the steps I'm going to take or the strategies I'm going to use to get there. Some would call these systems. A system is simply a way to get to where you're trying to go, or a way to do the work you're trying to do. So I start with my vision. Then I create my strategy. My strategy will then determine my action steps. So I know my strategy is such and such and so and so. So now I have to put in place my action steps. Now they can be over a long period of time. They can be over a short period of time, but I have to create my action steps. My action steps then determine what happens in my daily routine, what I'm trying to accomplish. Each of those action steps has responsibilities that must be accomplished so that each of those action steps become a reality, so that ultimately my strategy plays out and my vision becomes a reality. So that's a very simple view of how to get things to a point that your vision becomes reality. But again, Christian, it all starts with vision. Without a vision, there's no way to get where you're trying to go. Again, I just need to say this: without a target in front of you, you can't hit it. And what I find with many church leaders is they're just going to do the stereotypical ministry, and they have no vision. So let me illustrate this a little bit if I can.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go through all the steps and process, but I want to talk vision for just a minute. When I worked for Lifeway Christian Resources, which made me a national voice in the small group world, I asked God to give me a vision, and the vision was this. It was to see a biblical small group within walking distance of every person on the planet, making disciples that make disciples. That's a big vision. But I would suggest to you, if you don't have a God-sized vision, you don't have a vision that's come from God. Your vision needs to be big enough that you realize you can't accomplish it in your own merit. You're going to need for God to be at work for that to happen. Your vision also is what drives people to become part of the movement that you're trying to create. If your vision is simply, let's just have church, rather than let's create a church for the next generation so that their children come to know Christ, and we're going to reach 10,000 people in the next 20 years and go around the world making the gospel known to all people, that's a much better selling point than let's have church and show
Right.
up for church on Sunday and come to a small group and be involved in a mission endeavor.
Mm.
So I'm suggesting to you that the starting point for a great ministry, and especially for leadership, is to seek God's vision. And that should drive everything from that point. Now, as far as obtaining followers, some of that comes through integrity. People hear about your integrity and they want to be involved. It's actually pursuing people. A lot of pastors don't want to recruit people. They want to have a sign-up sheet someplace in the lobby or online. If you want to be part of my ministry, then you can just go there and sign up. You're never going to get the best people through a sign-up. You need to be recruiting people. There's a very well-known pastor whose father actually was president of a company. And so this guy had leadership abilities off the scale. Man, this guy he could have made a huge difference in this church. Near the end of his life, his pastor's son, who became one of the most well-known pastors in the country, actually said to his dad, "How come you never volunteered at church?" And he said, "Because nobody ever asked me."
Hmm.
And this happens way too often. The best of the best will not go to a sign-up sheet. They'll need a personal invitation. But in the retention of followers, you want to be consistent in how you do your work. You want them to have the information they need so that they can do their work with excellence. Nobody wants to be poor at what they do. So you need to also be training them as you bring them on board. You need to be hearing from them. Do a polling of the people working for you. Questionnaire that you can send out and get their input. Meet with them and ask them questions. People were much more apt to stay in the game if you give them part of the game to play. So if you're just directing them to do work but never allowing them to give you input on what's working and what isn't, you're not going to retain them as long. And again, I'll just say one more thing real quickly about retaining them. Have a personal relationship with them as much as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
Don't miss their birthdays. Don't miss anniversaries, even if it's just a handwritten card. And by the way, a handwritten card speaks loudly. I mean, a text message is sweet, but a handwritten card, and it's not just because my age that I'm saying this. I mean, and from a personal perspective, you took the time to handwrite something. It's vital. Obtain, retain, organize them. That is, get them in the right seat, doing the right thing. It's the Collins thing. Get people on the bus in the right seat, and your ministry or your organization will flourish. So find out what their spiritual gifts are and what they're passionate about and place them in a role that's right for them. And you'll see people who do very well, and your ministry will do well if you are a well-organized, highly effective leader leading with integrity, getting people's input throughout the time they're ministering alongside you, and you show them as much respect as you expect to receive. You can have a pretty good run as a leader in a church. The last point in that definition is to direct them. What I want to say about direction for anyone who has done any theater work, my background, high school and college, was doing a lot of theater. The director is the number one person. They're responsible for the whole production. I mean, if it goes well, they get celebrated. If it goes poorly, they get beat up. Mm-hmm. Leaders are outfronters. They're not waiting to respond to what's happening, although they have to at times. First, they're out front moving everyone towards the goal. I find that with a lot of leaders, especially young leaders, that they want things to fall in place. Things don't fall in place. Mm-hmm. Leaders direct people to a place, give them the tools they need and the resources they need and the direction they need to accomplish their work. But as is true in the oversight of a theatrical production, the leader is constantly, or the director is constantly reviewing what is taking place and tweaking what is taking place to perfect it. Great leaders also, church leaders, great church leaders, as do directors of theatrical productions, they are consistently reviewing what they're doing and what is happening under their direction and tweaking it to make it as perfect as possible. So I think this is very helpful for most people to think of it as they're the director of a theatrical production. They are ultimately responsible for everything that takes place. They're responsible for getting people in the right roles. They're responsible for giving them the tools and the resources they need to accomplish those roles with excellence. And it's a necessity that they're constantly reviewing every person and every aspect of the ministry they're doing and striving to perfect it to the highest level of perfection they can possibly achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for answering that. I think there's so much there, obviously, so much to unpack, but you summed it up so well, and I think that's going to be super helpful practically for those who are going into this church ministry and church leadership. Something you mentioned was when it comes to being a director of a group of people, the group's successes you're praised for, the group's failures you take hits for. Something that we talked about in our last conversation was this idea of being a good man in leadership. And how do we, while making tough decisions that impact some people in a good way, some people in a negative way, how do we remain a good man in leadership while also having to make these hard decisions?
Yeah, I think if the question you're asking is what I think it is how do people continue to perceive me as a good man when I have to make hard decisions?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
because I
it.
think that's where we're really leaning, and this is where it gets awkward as a leader, and yet
Mm-hmm.
it is vitally important as a leader to go ahead and make the hard call.
Hmm.
Yeah, so here's the deal. Leaders don't have the luxury, as do followers, of living in, I think this is a good idea, or this may make people mad, so I can't do that. Yeah, again, we come back to the vision. If the vision is going to become a reality, leaders have to make hard calls, realizing everyone's going to be affected. So if I could create a visual image, and I'll try to do this with my hands. So here's a leader at the top of the totem pole. Okay, let's say it differently. They're at the top of a cone-shaped mountain.
Okay.
Okay. So they're at the top of a cone-shaped mountain. Sprinkle all around that cone-shaped mountain are their followers or people who are part of their ministry. Or in a church, it's the lead pastor, it's every congregant. But they're sprinkled around this cone-shaped mountain. The only person that can look at that mountain and has the viewpoint to see everything that's going on is the leader at the top of that cone-shaped mountain. So they're the only one that has the knowledge base to make a wise decision based on all of the information. Guess what happens when they make a call sometimes? Those who can only see their limited viewpoint become disappointed, angry, upset, because from their perspective, that was a bad call.
Mm-hmm.
But the leader knows it was the only right call to make. A leader needs to realize they've got to make the hard call even when it's difficult for some people. What they need to keep in mind is they need to carefully analyze the decision they're making to be certain it's first the right timing and secondly the best call for the majority. Let me be careful though, you can't, even sometimes the majority will not think your call was the right call.
Mm-hmm.
But the timing is vital, and concluding the right call is the right call based on the outcome in accomplishing the vision is very, very important. Let me see if I can illustrate the timing thing. So
Yeah.
I got to tell you, Christian, I never know where I'm going. I know the point I'm trying to get to, but
Yeah.
I don't know the route to get there when I'm driving my car. Why is that? Because I completely depend on my GPS. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I plug the address in. I turn right when it says turn right. I turn left when it says to turn left, and I arrive at my location. But here's the deal: I now know the route to get there. But if I come to a stop sign and I turn at the wrong time, it could be disastrous. So I'm going in the right direction. Stop at the right stop sign. Stop at the right stop light. But the timing on when I turn will determine whether or not it's a disaster. It's the same with leadership. I can know the right thing to do, but do it at the wrong time, and it's still a disaster.
Hmm.
So as best I can, I need to evaluate where the organization is or where the ministry is at the time to conclude whether or not it's the right time to move to taking on a big initiative again, or making a staff change at this point, or fighting a hard fight to accomplish something. Too many leaders, they want to fight 5 wars at one time, and they never win. They normally lose their position. Because people on their team who live constantly in a state of battle mode, they don't want to do that. They want to do their ministry or do their work or do their volunteer work when it brings fulfillment to their hearts, not when there's a fight going on. Abraham Lincoln, it's a great book called Lincoln on Leadership. If you want to read a great book on leadership, Lincoln on Leadership, there's a description by the author of a time, if I remember correctly, during the Civil War, when a French ship entered a harbor, and Lincoln's inner circle wanted to go to war against France. I hope I get this right. I may have the wrong country, so forgive me, but the principle's the same. And Lincoln said, no one can fight 2 wars at one time. And this is this mistake that some pastors, especially young pastors, make, is they bring one war on, and then they say, oh, we need to do that also, so we'll fight that battle too. And their timing is off. Okay. Yeah, but I think the big thing I'd say into what you stated, I think what most leaders make, here's the mistake I think most leaders make. Mm-hmm. They don't want to make any hard calls because they're busy trying to make the masses happy. And you just realize, every leader needs to realize this, no matter what call they make, there are going to be some people disgruntled about the decision they've made. Mm-hmm. So you need to determine if the decision is the right decision, with the realization that making that hard call is going to make someone, going to disappoint, make someone angry, but you still need to make the call, because the vision you've been given may not become a reality unless you make some hard calls.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
Can I illustrate real quick, Christian?
Yeah.
In working with churches who had made transitions to become more relevant, so they realized their congregation is made up of people my age. I'm 68. But their congregation is made up of people between 60 years, well, basically, primarily between 60 years of age and beyond. Mm-hmm. And a new pastor comes and he says, I got to help our church become more relevant. So they start changing the style of worship, upgrading the technology, etc. And there's an uprising. People go crazy. These older people go, what are you doing to my church? I don't even like it anymore. It's not what I came on board 4 years ago. If this guy doesn't make that hard call, I can assure you, because I've worked with these churches, in 10 to 15 years, there are going to be about 8 people sitting in a worship center talking to a church consultant going, how can we save our church? And my response has to be, it's too late. You had your moment and you missed it. That pastor had to make a hard call. And if they had gone with him, they would have been unhappy. But if they had gone with him in the hard call, that church that had been planted 50 years ago or more to make the gospel known to that region would still be alive. But if that pastor never tries to make that hard call, that church is going to die. Does that make sense?
That does, and it takes me back to your analogy of standing on the top and the cone, and a decision that you make may influence people at the bottom negatively, positively. Either way, you're going to get some pushback, but making that decision is the best thing to do because you have the aerial view, you have the full picture, and I think that's a lesson I can learn, and definitely others can learn as a leader, but also as a follower. And as I follow leaders that I'm around, I can keep in mind that if they make a decision that I don't necessarily like, I should probably respect that because I do not have the full view. And I also like what you said in our previous conversation. One thing you said was leaders need to develop thick skin and a tender heart.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me, and I started looking for that in the leaders that I'm around. And it's so true that I think some have one or the other most of the times, but most people can tell when a leader has both. And that's the kind of leader that I feel like I learn from and want to emulate. And it definitely makes a difference in the lives of those that leader is leading. And I know as a leader yourself, you love pouring into young adults, the younger generation, and that's a big passion of yours. And I wanted to ask, man, what piece of advice, whether that be the greatest piece of advice or just a few little points, would you give to college students, young adults, teens as we try to navigate life?
Yeah, so here's what I'd suggest. This was pretty easy, and it's going to be more simple than you probably hoped, actually.
Let's go.
Realize you can learn from everyone you come in contact with.
Hmm.
Let me say that again. Realize you can learn from everyone you come in contact with. Even in our call today, Christian, I've learned from you, how you've done these follow-up statements, bringing back the statement that I shared last time we talked. I'm thinking to myself, okay, I need to remember that. Christian does that really well. But I have learned that everyone I come in contact with, if I pay attention and if I'm humble enough, I can learn something from. And in a younger years of my life, I would actually write those things down. I wish I had kept those notes. I have a dear friend who's probably one of the most effective group pastors I've ever known. He keeps a well, you don't need the same work you put in your phone, but he always keeps a little notebook with him. And when he hears a word of wisdom, he jots it down.
Hmm.
And he wrote a really great book on group ministry. And it was, there were a group of us sitting around a table, some of the most well-known group guys in the country. I just happened to have a chance to be at the table. And we had all written books on group ministry. And one of the guys said to this other fellow, I'm not using names because I didn't get their permission, but one of the guys who was the most, and probably still is, has written more books on group ministry than anybody I know of. We were at a table. All of us had written books on group ministry. And this one fellow who I said to take a notes in all these every time he heard a word of wisdom, one of the guys said to him, he said, your book may be the most quoted small group ministry book ever written. And the guy was like, oh, man, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then the guy followed up and said, yeah, you probably quoted more of us in your book than anybody ever has. And
That's awesome.
I got to tell you, that was a pretty cool statement in my mind. Because what I realized was over years of time, he had learned from everyone from a farmer to a CEO.
Wow.
And he jotted those things down. And I want to say this. Some of the most important things I ever learned in ministry was when I was 17 years old, and I was the music director for the Waddy Baptist Church, which ran 100 people. I was driving from Louisville, Kentucky, to the Waddy Baptist Church, which was nothing but farmers. And they would invite me to their farms in the afternoon. We had Sunday morning and Sunday night services. They would invite me to their farms in the afternoon to just be with the family, walk around the farm with them. And I learned some of the most important things about life and ministry by being with some farmer that a lot of pastors would just go, oh my gosh, I got to waste my afternoon. I have learned from everyone I've ever been willing to learn from, and they said something that made a difference or a word of wise counsel. So this is what I would suggest. If guys and gals your age, Christian, were to do what my buddy did and just chronicle every time you hear a good word of practical advice or wisdom about parenting or how to do a podcast, and just jot those things down and review them once in a while, it's going to be gold. Gold. But I would also suggest this: don't let that occur by happenstance. One of the wisest thing that my son Josh, who's pastor at Lakepointe, years ago in a sermon that I was on staff and the pastor was preaching when Josh was a teenager, was if you want to learn to be the best you can be at whatever God's called you to do, call the best you can get a meeting with and tell them you'll take them to lunch, and that you'll waste their time, pay for their lunch, take notes, have questions in order. Don't sit down and go, what do you think I need to know? Have a list of questions you want them to answer about the ministry area you're going to be involved in, and take notes. And Josh got to sit down with some of the, I don't know how, just the Lord opened the doors, but some mega church pastors when he was in college. He would set up these lunch appointments and just sit down and take notes. And today he's pastoring one of the largest churches in the country, and he has understanding of it because when he was 19 years old, he was taking these guys to lunch and jotting down the responses they gave him. So don't leave that to happenstance. Set up those appointments.
That's awesome. I mean, when you gave that piece of advice, I perked up because that's something that I have been told but have forgot. And then thinking through it, it's like, how amazing is it to approach every conversation, every interaction you have with the mindset of like, oh, what could I learn from this person, versus the mindset of like, oh, how can I look this way in the midst of being around this person, or how can I say the right thing with this person? If you have the that other focused mentality of what can I learn from them, I feel like you're going to be so much more connected, and you're going to walk away so much more fulfilled because you learned something. You probably encourage that person by being open to the fact of learning something from them, and then that's a something that you can implement as you go about your day. And I love how practical it is when it comes to writing those things down, and how awesome it would be to look back at that and say, man, this is all I learned from just college friends. These are all the things I learned from CEOs and people I've been able to sit down with.
Christian, can I say one more thing real quickly?
Of course.
You did. I don't think you meant to go down this path, and I don't want to take us down a path you don't want to go down. But one thing that you said kind of is triggered in my head, that when people want to get ahead in an organization, how do they get there? Here's one thing I've seen. 68 years old, as I mentioned, I've seen this over and over and over again. The young leader who comes into an organization at a low or mid-level role, and their dream is to get to a much higher level and a greater role in the organization, I've noticed almost 100% of the time, the person that tries to prove themselves by telling people how good they are or what they need another opportunity, the people who try to elevate themselves never get there. But the people who come in humbly and meet with supervisors and say, I want to learn from you, almost always get those opportunities. Humility will take you places that pride can never get you. And this is a mistake a lot of people make.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And I really appreciate the practical advice and really just conversation. It's been super encouraging. I'm excited to listen back and share it with a lot of friends, specifically those going into church ministry. And I think this one's going to be encouraging for all ages. Before we go, I want to give you the opportunity to just, if there's anyone that wants to stay connected with you or hear more about your ministry, your books, where would be the best place to do that?
Yeah, I don't have a website. Let me give you my email address. And
Yeah.
what I'm doing right now is I'm coaching, consulting, training, and writing. So if I can help your church in any way, I would just mention one book to you of some that I've written, and that is The Perpetually Growing Church, Best Practices of America's Most Influential Churches. In it is interviews with some very well-known church leaders. I try to go down the path of the book is about my years of taking notes in being with megachurch leaders and what they're doing to grow a perpetually growing church. And so I think it'd be a good read for anybody. Really, I actually went through the book because people were saying, gosh, there's so much in there. It answers 269 questions that church leaders are asking.
Wow.
And I actually created a list. If somebody buys the book and emails me, I'll send them the list and what page the questions and answers are on.
That's
But
awesome.
if I can help your church in any way through consulting, coaching, training, my email address is rick.pgcc@gmail.com. That's rick.pgcc@gmail.com. And I'd love to speak for a men's event, do a deacon's retreat, come train your staff on volunteerism. I've just finished a book on volunteerism, how to get volunteers and retain them, something you mentioned a little bit. So I'd love to help any way I can. rick.pgcc@gmail.com.
Perfect. Well, Pastor Rick, thanks again so much for this conversation, and thanks for your time and the wisdom that you shared. And I'm excited for those listening in to that potential of connecting with you and benefiting from what I've benefited from today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Christian.
Yes, sir. And thank you guys for tuning in to the Christian Henderson Show. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share it with someone you value and someone who might find this topic interesting and applicable. I know I'll be sharing this with my friends who are working or plan to work full-time in church ministry and others as well. make sure to ask yourself the question, what is the next best thing you can do now? It's time to decide what kind of leader you want to be. Let's go!